Hi everyone. Today we're going to be learning about moon phases. If you don't have these materials listed here on the screen, please pause the video really quickly and go find your science notebook, a pencil, and some colored pencils or crayons. Let's start out with a bell ringer from some of our vocab from last week. I ask you to write these down in your notebook. These are words that you will definitely see on a quiz from me in the future. So just pause the video and I want you to do this matching activity. You can just write your answers in the margin of your notebook. If you'll write the number 1 and then put the letter that you think belongs with number 1. So go ahead and do that now. Unpause the video when you're finished. So let's go over these very briefly. So our bell ringer answers. So we're looking at two types of motion, both rotation and revolution. That was 1 and 2. And rotation is, of course, the type of motion where an object spins on its axis, whereas revolution is another type of motion, but if you'll remember, it's a motion where one object travels around another object. Orbit, although related to revolution, is actually just the curved path of an object, so it's not a type of motion. We also looked at 3 moon features last week. 2 of them, Maria and Highlands, are 4 and 5. Maria, I'm asking you to remember that that's the dark colored areas on the moon's surface, whereas the highlands, those are those lighter colored areas that you can see from here on Earth. So as we talk about moon phases, there's some really basic things that I need you to be able to do by the end of this video. So first off, I'm going to want you to be able to list and draw the 5 major shapes of the moon phases. I'm talking about crescent, gibbous, quarter, new, and full moons. I just need you to be able to sketch those. I'll also need you to be able to recognize and compare waxing and waning phases. You're going to need to know the difference between those two words and be able to recognize them on a moon. I'll also ask you to be able to explain that the moon phases are caused by the moon moving. And finally, I will ask you to be able to draw the sun, earth, and moon system during the 4 primary moon phases: new, first, full, and last quarter. Here we go. So I'm going to ask you before we begin, and you can just do this in your head, pause the video, and I want you to see how many phases of the moon. There's really 8 main phases that you can name. So once you have your answer, I want you to go ahead and click play again. Pause the video. Let's see how you did. Let's start looking at some of these moon phases. So phases, when we say phases, we of course just mean the different shapes of the moon that we see from Earth. Some of those phases are new moon, something called waxing crescent, and we have first quarter, which is strange because it looks like to me half of the moon is lit, not a quarter. Waxing gibbous, full moon, waning gibbous, third quarter, and waning crescent. I do want you to note down at the bottom that it takes about a month, 29.5 days to be exact, for the moon to go through one of these complete cycles. So in other words, to go from new moon all the way back to new moon again takes about 30 days or 1 month. And that's really how our calendar is set up. So for us to talk about moon phases, we first have to address one of the most common student misconceptions. Many students believe that the different phases or lit portions of the moon that we see here on Earth is actually caused by Earth's shadow falling on the moon. Somehow the moon is affected by Earth's shadow. And that is simply not true. Moon phases have nothing to do with Earth's shadow. I need you to know that half of the moon is always lit by the sun. And if you look very quickly at this diagram, you're going to note, I want you to pay attention to this inner ring in here. I want you to note that no matter where the moon is in that 30-day orbit around the Earth, half of it is always going to be lit. Now, if you look to the outside, if we look at these pictures, this shows us what we would actually see from the Earth. This shows us the moon phase that we would be in. So, for example, half the moon is lit, but from Earth, we see that none of it is lit. Half the moon is lit, and we can see what's called a waxing crescent, meaning some of it, and on the right-hand side, is lit, but notice it's lit less than half. Half of the moon is indeed lit, and it looks like half of the moon is lit. We call this the first quarter. Half of the moon is lit, but from Earth, it appears that more than half is lit. When we go over here, we can see that still half of the moon is lit, just like every other object in our solar system. Everything orbiting around the sun, generally speaking, half of it is always lit. Half of it is experiencing day, and the other half is experiencing night. But at this position, it's a full moon. So keep that in mind. That's a big idea, and that's going to help you to remember that it is not Earth's shadow causing the moon phases. Half of the moon is always lit by the sun. That doesn't change. So we need to be cognizant. We need to be able to really draw, and we need to be able to list these really basic moon phases. So these are some shapes that you need to be able to recognize. So the first one, I want you to take a look at crescent. A crescent moon really just describes any moon where less than half appears to be lit. Now notice that word appears to be lit. That's a big deal. The reason that's a big deal is because we know that half of the moon is indeed always lit. But a crescent moon is where less than half of the moon appears to be lit. The next one I want us to look at is gibbous. Gibbous, you can see that it appears that half of the moon, more than half of the moon, appears to be lit. So, so less than half of the moon appears to be lit. More than half of the moon appears to be lit. These are two basic shapes of the moon that we can use when we're describing those moon phases. What if we have exactly half of the moon? Anytime we have exactly half of the moon that appears to be lit, we call that a quarter moon. We're going to have two quarter moons. Sometimes you'll see them called first quarter and last quarter. Other times you will see them called first quarter and third quarter. It really just depends. Either is correct. We also have a full moon. That's a basic shape. That's where all of the moon appears to be lit. And not shown here is something called new moon. So a new moon is where we can't really see the moon, or none of the moon appears to be lit. So there's our really five basic shapes. Our five basic shapes are crescent, gibbous, quarter, and full, and of course new. And you just need to remember that each one of these shapes describes how much of it appears to be lit from Earth. We also need to take on these two terms called waxing and waning. And simply put, waxing and waning describes what seems to be happening. It's an overall trend with how the moon light appears. So let's look first at our waxing phases. If we start out at a new moon, every night it is going to appear that a little bit more of the moon is lit. So notice how here we would have a crescent, and here we would still have a crescent moon, but it's a larger crescent. More is lit. We keep going. A few more days pass. We arrive at the first quarter where half of the moon appears to be lit, and then more than half, and then almost all of the moon is lit. We would call all of these waxing phases. And the reason we call them waxing phases is because the lit portion of the moon is increasing. It's getting larger. The moon is becoming more lit. Now, once we reach full moon, we're no longer waxing, right? Because the moon is completely full. What we're going to discover here is we call where the amount of the lit portion of the moon is decreasing each night. So the lit portion of the moon appears to be less and less. We're going to call those waning phases. So when we describe waxing, that's describing moon phases where the lit part of the moon appears to be increasing, meaning it's getting bigger each night. I do want you to know when you look into the sky, you can tell if the moon is waxing or if the moon is waning. To tell if it's waxing, so here in the northern hemisphere, if we look and the lit part of the moon is on the right side, then we know that's a waxing moon. Okay? So we have the lit portion on the right-hand side. That's going to be a waxing moon. Now, waning, of course, describes moon phases where the lit portion of the moon appears to be decreasing, meaning it's getting smaller each night. It means we're headed back toward a new moon. So, sort of the opposite here in the northern hemisphere, we can look into the sky, look at the moon, and we can tell if it's waxing or waning. And if it's waning, we're going to see that the left side of the moon is going to be lit up. So, but remember, keep this in mind. In reality, half of the moon is always lit. This calendar does a pretty good job of showing you the night by night changes that we might see starting with a new moon. And we can see here, it doesn't say what month this is for, but this calendar shows our new moon starting on a Thursday. These are some of my favorite moons. Of course, we start waxing here. And each night you can see that progression. You can see the progression where a little bit more of the moon is lit until we get here, almost day 9, where it looks like we've reached that first quarter moon. So we went through the crescent phases. After that quarter, we're moving into the gibbous. You can see that more and more and more is lit. I guess we were looking right here about day 16. We can see here on day 16 that we've reached a full moon. Could be day 17. But essentially, you can see that these changes over the course of a month are very gradual. So after the full moon, of course, we move back into these waning phases where the amount that's lit keeps getting less and less. We get down to this quarter moon here on day 23. And then everything after this day 23 looks like these are going to be all waning crescents until we go back to the beginning of the cycle again, and the cycle begins all over with a new moon. So I don't really want you to do this, but I do want you to take a moment to remember that I told you at the outset of the video, it is not the Earth's shadow on the moon that causes the moon phases. It's quite a bit simpler than that actually, but it's really hard for us to imagine. So the cause of the moon phases is not Earth's shadow, it's something else. And this does about the best job that I can of helping you understand what exactly causes the moon phases. So the moon, as it moves around Earth, as the moon is moving around Earth, half of it is always lit, and we can see that. But as it changes positions in its orbit, as it moves along its orbit, we from Earth are able to see different parts of the moon. And by different parts, we're able to see different parts of the moon that's lit. So some nights we would see exactly half. Other nights we might be able to see all of it. So if we look, we're coming up to a full moon right there. So at a full moon, that just means the alignment of the sun and the earth and the moon allows us to be able to see all of the lit half of the moon. So there's that full moon again. We can see all of it when it's in that position. When we come back over to the opposite side, we can see that the lit half right there is going to be at new moon is going to be facing toward the sun, which means we won't be able to see any of the moon. So watch this new moon again. So right here we're at new moon. Notice the lit half is facing away from Earth. We can't see it. So a new moon is simply going to be that alignment. And watch that quarter right there. So that was, here, let's watch these two quarter moons. So here is our first quarter. So you have to imagine when we reach these quarters, here's the last quarter, we're only going to be able to see half of the half of the moon that is lit. Those are our quarter moons. That's actually why we call them quarters. So coming up on that quarter moon again, here's our quarter moon. So we'll only be able to see half of that lit portion. So the big thing I want you to keep in mind here is that it is just the moon moving along its orbit that causes the phases. We are just able to see different parts here on Earth of the moon that are lit. It is not, moon phases are not caused by Earth's shadow. That is the most common idea about what causes the moon phases. Please don't be someone who thinks that. Okay, so we looked briefly at this, and I want to try to draw out again sort of this is an alignment thing. So I want to start out here at our new moon. So you're here on Earth. You're standing right here. Look at where the lit portion of the moon is here at new moon. It's facing away from you. You can't see it. So here on Earth, this is our new moon. Moon's eventually, it's going to gradually move around. So let's go up here to our first quarter. So you're standing here on Earth. As you look at the moon, you can't see this half that's up here. You can only see that. Okay? So half is still lit, but you're only able to see part of the half that's lit. Let's move on over. Let's get to full moon. So at full moon, half of the moon is lit, but you can see with the sun over here, here on Earth, you're able to see the entire half of the moon that is lit. So you're definitely able to see it all when we reach this position. Moon moves along its orbit. We go down here to the third quarter. Notice here in the third quarter, we're in these waning phases now. The opposite side of the moon is lit. Remember, waxing. So that means the right side is going to be lit. After full moon, we move into the waning phases, which means the left side of the moon is going to be lit. So here at third quarter, at this position, half of the moon is lit, but we can only see half of what is lit. So that should about really help you with moon phases. I do want you to sort of keep this in mind. If you were to visit the moon, because this is a little strange, some people think of these phases of the moon as being something only that the moon experiences. But if you were standing on the moon, let's suppose you're an astronaut, if you were to look up into the sky, you would actually be able to watch things like Earthrise, just like here on Earth, we watch moonrise. And you would also be able to look up, and over the course of an entire month, you would be able to watch the phases of Earth. So this is not something that's limited to our moon. This is something that is based on the motion of one object around another. And if you were on the moon, it would be hard to tell that you were orbiting the Earth. You might even think the Earth was orbiting you. But you would be able to see Earthrise and the phases of Earth if you were on the moon. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. All right, so here's our assignment. Your assignment is going to be to use the video to get definitions for the following key vocabulary words in your science notebook. You'll need to pause the video, and then I want you to go back and remember you'll be able to use your notebook on your quizzes, but I want you to find crescent, gibbous, quarter, new, and full, and waning and waxing. And I want you to add some definitions from the video to your notebook for those. All right, so I'm going to put this just for fun lab up. I'm not going to collect this, but if you really want to see how the moon phases work, this is a very easy way for you to do it. It's absolutely the best way. I never understood it myself until I did this lab. It was a little confusing to me. You're like, how does changing position change what I see on here on Earth? So here's what you're going to need. So wait till late this evening. Wait till you can get a really dark room. You're going to need some sort of lamp, a bright light of some sort that you don't want it to be an overhead, you want it to be a lamp, so we want it to be sort of chest level or lower. If you can take the shade off, ask an adult if you can take the shade off your lamp. That will be very helpful. We're going to use this lamp to be our light source, in other words, the sun. And then you're going to need one more thing. You're going to need a styrofoam ball. Now, many of you won't have some sort of white styrofoam ball laying around, but you may have a baseball or a softball or a volleyball. You just need to find something that's whitish and roundish. Okay, that's what you're going to look like. That's going to be your moon. And so the procedure is you're going to hold your styrofoam ball out in front of you. You're going to fully extend your arm, and you're going to stay in the same place, but you're slowly going to begin turning your whole body, keeping your arm out, and you're just going to watch the styrofoam ball. So the light is going to do what the light does, but you're going to watch the styrofoam ball. Depending on the source of your light, you may have to hold the styrofoam ball slightly up above your head so that the shadow created by your head doesn't land on your moon, which is styrofoam ball. And I want you to see if you can spot those moon phases. So this is what you're going to be doing. You should look a little like this. You can see this person's pretty fancy. This is our side view. And Their light source, of course, is back over here somewhere. I can tell because this half of the moon, of their moon, is lit. And you're just going to hold this out and observe. And then you're going to begin rotating. You're going to just in place, you're going to slowly begin spinning in place. Slowly, and you're going to move through each of these moon phases. You should be, if you are watching your moon and you're being cautious of the shadow created by your head, you don't need this fancy stick. You can just hold it up on the tips of your fingers. You will be able to absolutely see how the changing position of the moon is what creates the moon phases. Very cool lab. If you can find the materials and make a little time to do this, you will not regret it. You'll never forget what causes the changing phases of the moon. Well, guys, I think that about does it for now. So really, until next time, stay curious.